US and British diplomats are pulled out of Yemen, and Western visitors are told to leave immediately. Embassies across the Middle East are shut. But can the threat from al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula be contained?
American Special Operations Forces are being readied for deployment, I've been told. It looks like escalation.
And what about the people who can't leave? We follow the Yemeni villagers living and dying with the daily reality of American drone strikes. Good evening. The exodus of Westerners from Yemen continued today amid ongoing fears over the terror threat in the country. British diplomatic staff are already en route to the UK. It comes after the New York Times reported that American security services intercepted phone conversations between two senior members of al-Qaeda, representing, the paper says, the most serious plot since 9/11. Our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, is here with more. What can you tell us, Mark?
Well, I understand they're now looking at sending special operations forces into Yemen. Now, these sorts of people have been in and out of there in recent years as training team members or in liaison roles, for example, in relation to some of those drone strikes. But the sort of option that's now being looked at is the sort of option that would give them a strike option against the al-Qaeda leadership, able to mount the kind of operations we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan in recent years.
And what is the threat?
Well, it's interesting. There seems to have been a whole, if you like, tiered bit of intelligence reporting from across the region, tiered levels, if you like, of different types of intelligence coming in, being assessed in different places. I mean, we know that the Americans across the region have basically shut up shop with embassies in 19 countries. I mean, right the way from Tripoli over on the west of that map in Libya to Muscat in the east, obviously Sana'a in Yemen, Cairo, major diplomatic stations. That seems to be the result of general chatter, Ramadan coming to an end, a sense that Islamists in quite a few countries would like to do either major protests or actual attacks on some American interests. But then, of course, there's the much more specific stuff about Aden and Sana'a. We know from the New York Times report that you mentioned that the US administration says they intercepted conversations between Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of al-Qaeda, and Nasser al-Wahishi, the leader of this very competent affiliate, if you like, in the area of Yemen, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, some suggesting there were phone calls. It would seem strange to tell them you were listening to the phone calls. You'd clearly lose that source of intelligence if that was the method you were using. Others that it was electronic communication, a little bit vaguer there. Then there's another level of intelligence reporting down at the ground level in Sana'a. We know, for example, from the Yemeni Interior Ministry, they say that they've tracked al-Qaeda militants coming into the city, Sana'a, ready to mount attacks on Western interests there. We know also things hotting up in the country today with a further drone strike north of the capital in Marib province, said to have killed 4 people, including 2 on the Yemeni Interior Ministry's 25 most wanted list. Also reports of US manned surveillance aircraft over the country today. And briefly, is the UK's assessment of the risk the same as the US's? It seems less stark, if you like. People in Whitehall argue that the Americans may be taking no chances because of what happened last September in Benghazi when they lost an ambassador. And the UK's view is not to get involved with the drone strikes and with the direct action type forces. Mark, thank you. Let's talk now to Conservative MP Rory Stewart, who recently returned from Yemen, and to David Gordon, Director of Policy Planning at the State Department during the George W. Bush administration and now of the Eurasia Group, a political risk consultancy. Gentlemen, good evening. Rory Stewart, is it a good idea?
Is it a good idea to withdraw British diplomats?
Is it a good idea to get the special forces ready for deployment?
I think we need to understand what this threat is. I mean, in that I really agree with David, that we are really moving in the dark here. Unless we actually know what this threat is, it's very difficult to understand. It's very unusual to have a situation where you would remove all your British diplomats out of a country. normally in somewhere like Iraq or Afghanistan, where there are very severe threats, or even Yemen, where we've had very bad threats for the last 2 years, you'd lock down the embassy and then you'd trust to the embassy defences to keep people out. So I suspect there must be something very, very strange going on here in the nature of this threat.
Meaning what?
Well, it must be something where they must guess, and maybe David's right, the Benghazi analogy is the right one, that the traditional defences of the embassy would not be enough to keep out the threat. Can I just also say that we need to very much distinguish the terrorist threat from what's actually been happening in Yemen, which has been much more positive over the last 2 years than anybody ever expected. It's very surprising now that we find ourselves looking at Yemen in this way, because in fact, if you look at all the negotiations that's been happening, people predicted civil war, they predicted chaos, and actually things have been much better recently.
Do you really think so? I mean, the problem of Yemen and al-Qaeda operatives there has been around for a number of years, hasn't it?
It has, absolutely. But if you go back a year or 18 months, al-Qaeda were actually holding territory in Yemen. And that was got rid of. They no longer hold that territory. And all the predictions that there was going to be huge problems between separatists in the south and groups in the north didn't really materialize. Yemen has been much more peaceful than people feared.
How, Rory Stewart, how should the West deal with that then?
I think we need to deal cautiously. And what I mean by this is that we mustn't upset a lot of the progress that has been made in Yemen. In the long run, the way to deal with the terrorist threat in Yemen is to get stability in that country. And that stability has painfully been getting there. And it's been getting there because we've managed to hold Russia and China and the United States and France and Britain together with the whole Gulf Cooperation Council. Very unusual to have all these countries cooperating. So what we want to avoid is an anti-terrorist strategy that begins to disrupt that stability that's beginning to emerge. So let's hope that whatever this is, we're going to get back to diplomatic operations and we're going to be able to reopen these embassies.
No more drones?
Drone strikes will continue in Yemen, but this is something David
Would you
probably
like
can
them
talk
to stop?
Sorry?
Would you like them to stop?
Am I in favour of drone strikes? I'm not, but this is for different reasons, a great fan of drone strikes. It's something I've opposed in other contexts, but I think we can expect them to continue in Yemen for the foreseeable future.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's clear that the US thinks Yemen is the new front line in the war with al-Qaeda, which is why they've been sending as many drones there as they have to Pakistan and Afghanistan. Strikes by drone aircraft have wiped out a whole generation of al-Qaeda's leadership. But is the use of them creating as many enemies as they're killing? Yalda Hakim has been to Zinjibar in southern Yemen. Her report contains some disturbing images.
We're heading into Zinjibar in southern Yemen. For years, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP, have planned attacks from this part of the country. There have been Yemeni army operations on the ground, American drone strikes from the air, and repeated al-Qaeda counterstrikes. This is a town under siege. On the streets, we can find little public support for al-Qaeda, but plenty of anger over the drones that target AQAP.
Who do you blame for the destruction of your town?
رأي المسؤول على الدمر هذا كامل وتنظيم القاعدة ومن يدعمهم من الدول الغربية. أما تنظيم القاعدة هم مواطنين بيعبوهم وبيدوا لهم بياس بيخربوا البلاد على حساب الآخرين. أما الطيران هو كله أمريكي بيدمر الأطفال مع النسوان لا بيفرق لا بين قاعدة ولا بين مواطن ولا بين صغير ولا بين كبير. وهو الأكبر أكبر ما بيدمر البلاد هو الطيران.
Winning the support of people like this is crucial in America's fight against extremism. But people here fear US drones as much as they fear al-Qaeda.
حياة كل المواطنين كانت رعب خوف من ضربات الطيران من ضربات الجيش
Mohammed Bagash and his 2 children were outside a health clinic when it was hit by an American strike. They ran to a school and hid in the basement. But then the school was hit too.
دخل الشظايا يعني رجع البدروم يعني وكأنه كان الناس في نار يعني كله ظلام. بعد ما راح الظلام نشوف أولادي وابني معور هنا برجله والشهيدة ضربت هنا في مؤخرة الرأس.
He carried his children out. His son survived, but his 8-year-old daughter bled to death.
بعد ما يفقد كل الدم رجعت صفراء مثل الهرد أصفر ما يعني وكأنها فنيلة صفراء رجعت جسمها كامل ذبلت خلاص يعني ايش اقول.
15 eyewitnesses reported seeing a drone hovering in the air and 2 jets circling overhead.
طفل عمرها 8 سنوات ليش؟ ايش ذنبها قتلت؟ مش بشر الذي انتهت هذه.
President Obama has said that drone strikes kill far fewer civilians than conventional bombing or ground operations. In the capital, Sana'a, I've come to meet one of the most pro-American voices in Yemen. Farah al-Muslimi runs a pro-democracy organization. He thinks the drone war is playing right into Al-Qaeda's hands.
The United States thinks it understands Yemen. But the drones have been, I think, one of the most effective tools of AQAP to succeed in Yemen. Big part of Al-Qaeda's power at the moment is by convincing Yemenis that they are in a war with America, and America is attacking the sovereignty of Yemen.
One of its biggest mistakes, Farah says, is the way the US deals with civilian casualties.
You're killing civilians for no reason, for no need about that. And you're not even going to say sorry after that, or admit it, or issue an apology, or pay compensation.
Last September, Ahmed al-Sabuli was working in the fields outside the town of Rada. His father, mother and sister had gone to visit the local health clinic. It was 3 p.m. when he heard a buzzing noise in the sky. He looked up.
لا يعني وقت الضربة شفناها هي مكانها تدور. بس هؤلاء الثنتين الحربيات الذي أقبلن حنينهن كالرعد هن ناس لا تمان يعني كنا نراها كبيرة هكذا خرج منها ضربة يعني ضربة قوية قلت هذا الضربة أدرينين زاد سوون يعني شوط ثاني ضربين الضربة الثانية حتى أننا شحرت هكذا إلى حد كان يضربن إن الغبار قام.
Ahmed jumped on his motorbike to see what had happened. When he got there, he found that 2 missiles had hit a truck. It was carnage.
السيارة هذه تحرق بالنار قد انقلبت قد مقلوبة أبدي أشوف لا أغلى ما أرى أبي وأمي وأختي عندما نظرت عيني هكذا والله أراهم قد أحرقوا ما عدا الله العظام حرقوا حتى أنهم صاروا كالفحم. عند على ما أمي باضعت أختي في حجبها.
هذا ضربة من الطيران الأمريكي الذي لا يكون أجواء.
This footage was given to us by a local journalist. It's too gruesome to show in full. The truck was packed with passengers coming back from the market. The target was probably a local Al-Qaeda leader seen travelling on the same stretch of road. He got away, but 13 people were incinerated.
دائما ليل ونهار الطيران الأمريكي بيقلقنا وملقى أطفالنا ومرهب الناس جميعا. مروحين الطحين الحاجات لأطفالهم الديزل لمخايلهم بدون أي يكون عندهم أي حاجة.
The few people that survived were taken to the local clinic. They report seeing at least 1 drone and 2 planes in the air.
يا ناصر ايش الذي جرى اليوم؟ ايش الذي وقع؟ تكلم. طايرة. وانتم مروحين ايش؟
مروحين مليش.
عرفتني. انت عرفتني؟
صلي. مو عن قضية حقي.
ايش انتم؟
ما قدرنا نوصل الملف حقنا سمعنا الدب طايرة ناس يعني سقطت تضربنا.
وش معكم فوق السيارة؟
معي ركاب.
معك ركاب ايه. شي معكم عوائل؟ تنتين توفينا التنتين صح؟
انت ايش يعني ما هو بنتها او لا؟
لا بنت على الفقير.
لا انت على الفقير وبنتها.
ايوه لا حول ولا قوه.
يعني وسرحت وهي مبدله بالكسوة الجديد على أساس أنها بتدخل ردع. يعني واحد ما معنا الله والله إن أنا أحبها وأتحنج بها. ما أنا داير إنها ما أنا داير قد هذا آخر النظر إن أنا أزيد أنظرها.
In an off-the-record quote given to a US newspaper, US officials did concede Rudder was an American strike. But there has been no American acknowledgement or apology to the families of the 13 victims in Yemen.
What does your community think? Who do they blame for this?
الفكرة عندنا يقولوا إنها الدولة الأمريكية، إنها هي الذي تجد هذه القوات الثقيلة والسلاح المحرم، وهي دي تجد الطائرات بدون طيار.
What would you say to the people who ordered this strike?
نريدهم أنهم يقدموا إلى المحاكمة، إلى العدالة، أنهم يأخذوا جزاءهم.
The Yemeni government has promised an investigation into the attack, but no one we spoke to has seen any evidence of an inquiry. One group that does claim to offer justice and redress is Al-Qaeda. We've heard many reports of Al-Qaeda appearing after airstrikes, offering compensation and increasing recruitment.
Al-Qaeda have stepped in to help rebuild homes. They provide funeral costs and offer financial support to the families of those killed and injured. They also pressure the relatives of those killed to join up to gain revenge. It's clear that even when they lose active members, Al-Qaeda use these strikes as an opportunity to recruit many more.
President Obama has said there is little chance of capturing militants. Yemen is too weak, the state's reach too limited. He says sometimes the only option is to kill. But here, many argue suspects can be caught, and they accuse the United States of extrajudicial execution. Anwar al-Awlaki was chief propagandist for AQAP. A Yemeni American, he called for attacks on American targets. He had close ties to Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, the underwear bomber who tried to explode a bomb on a plane over Detroit on Christmas Day 2009. I'm on my way to meet Anwar's father, Nasser al-Awlaki. Nasser says he was negotiating a deal that would have seen his son put on trial. Instead, Anwar was killed by a drone strike.
But your son was preaching hate and had himself praised attacks on America for years.
Even if he made some of those sermons which could be classified as hate sermons, I don't think that's right for the United States to go and kill him.
But he is accused of being involved in the airliner plot.
Legally, these are only allegations. I mean, they have not been proven in a court of law. I don't know that in any court that those allegations were proven against my son. If there are any allegations against my son, the United States government could have done something else, going to court, but they did not do that. They went ahead and killed him.
Nasser al-Awlaki says the ideology that consumed his son is now taking many more.
There were maybe 300 people who were in Al-Qaeda. Now we are talking about thousands of people all over Yemen.
We requested an interview with the US ambassador in Yemen, but our request was declined. The Yemeni Foreign Minister Abu Bakr al-Kirbi did agree to an interview. We began by asking whether America's targeting of Yemenis in Yemen is a threat to the country's sovereignty.
Well, I think sovereignty now is actually endangered if this is done without the approval of the government. But if it is done with the approval of the government and for the interests of the Yemeni people in their fight against terrorism, I don't think this applies.
But it's making people angry.
I know it makes everybody angry to see drones coming and hitting targets in Yemen.
And
But
killing
this is, but-
civilians.
But this is accidental. I mean, they are not targeting innocent people get killed, unfortunately.
Every Yemeni we've spoken to has told us that targeted strikes act as a successful recruitment tool for them.
I've heard this argument. There might be some truth in it, but I think the fact is that if your targets are Al-Qaeda leaders, and if they are endangering the security of your country, there is no alternative.
The future of this conflict will depend on whether America can convince Yemenis that it is on their side. Every night in the back streets, young kids get together for a game of football. But growing up in Yemen is hard. Their prospects are bleak.
Corruption is endemic. Yemen is beset by tribalism. The economy is in a mess. It'll take more than military campaigns to rid the country of Al-Qaeda.
The US provides hundreds of millions of dollars in civilian aid to Yemen. But the noise from targeted strikes is drowning out other progress. And whilst America continues to decimate Al-Qaeda from the sky, opposition in the streets is growing. At ground level, winning in Yemen is harder than it looks.